Okay, so we're moving to our last panel, case studies in intervention and peace building. Just to let you know that Teresa Almeida Cravo from University of Coimbra will be with us through Skype. She'll be the last one to speak, and I hope it works. Oh, she's online. Okay, don't. Good part. Do you want to? Okay. Yeah, if she calls, we stop and I put her online. So, okay, we're going to have first Giulia Piccolino. Giulia joined the
Loughborough University, which was actually, you might not know this university, but yesterday it was ranked the 5th best university in the UK by the Guardian University Guide.
Excellent. So this university, excellent university. So she joined this university in September 2016. Previously, she was a postdoctoral research sponsored by Alexander von Humboldt Foundation at Giga Institute of Global and Area Studies in Hamburg. She remains affiliated at Giga as an associate research fellow. Her background is in international relations and interdisciplinary area studies, in particular West Africa, where she carried out most of her fieldwork. She was awarded with her PhD at the University of Florence, Italy, 2012, with a dissertation where she explored the political use of nationalism during the conflict and peace process in Côte d'Ivoire. And she also worked in the field of electoral assistance and observation for the United Nations and the Carter Center, an experience that has greatly strengthened her understanding in international conflict management. They took this from you.
Thanks a lot,
okay, you have
for giving my biography. Thanks a lot for you to invite me here. I have to say something that Maíra didn't mention. Through the Giga, even if I worked mostly on West Africa, through the Giga I developed some sort of interest and affection for Latin America, so I'm very happy to be here with you. So my presentation is mostly about Ivory Coast, and about the problem of local peace building in a conflict like the Ivorian one that terminated with the military victory of one of the warring parties. But I'm also trying to make some more general points about this hype of the local turn that has imbued the thinking of both practitioners, the United Nations, and academics when thinking about peace building in the last 10 years. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the case for going local, but I'm also going to talk about the problems and the limitation of this approach that I see. And then I'm going to talk about my case study. So there have been two broad arguments that have been made in favor of taking a local approach to peace building. So the first one is what we could call the problem-solving argument, and the most famous expression is Séverin Autesser's book on the trouble with the Congo. It's the idea that international intervention will fail if it doesn't address local conflicts. And there is a rationale for this. If you look at where violence is concentrated in countries that are considered at war, it is actually very localized and concentrated in certain particular regions. And the Congo, of course, is a very good example of this. At the same time, you also have the emancipatory critical argument in favor of the local turn. So the intellectual roots are in thinkers like Lederach, but more recently, famous Richmond McGuinty school has promoted it very much. And it's this idea that we have to build peace starting from ordinary people and their everyday experiences, and then we will build a peace that is more meaningful and more legitimate. So all this sounds great, And the United Nations, the World Bank, the UK Development Cooperation in the last documents use a lot the term local and talk a lot about local communities, local civil society. But there are also certain problems that I think are not mentioned enough. So the first problem is with the problem-solving argument. There's actually little empirical evidence that addressing local conflicts is either sufficient or necessary to achieve peace. And even in a paradigmatic case like the Eastern Congo that Ottosar is looking at, when you actually see who are the protagonists of the violence in this region, you find persons that are not coming from the local communities, are not motivated by local issues, but have very strong ties with the political elites in Kinshasa and in Kigali. For instance, Bosco Ntaganda, this famous war criminal, he had very strong ties with the Rwandan leadership. And I also see another problem with the emancipatory approach. One problem that I see with authors like Richmond and McKinsey that insist on the local is that they tend to create this binary between the local and the international. And basically between the local and the international there is nothing. But actually in practice, in post-conflict context, in the middle there is the national state. And we've seen a lot of cases where the national state uses this rhetoric of local peace building and actually uses local peace building programs to control civil society and to legitimate authoritarian rule. So now going to the specific case, of conflicts that terminate with a military victory. I want to argue here that it's very problematic to think that we can build the peace here starting from the local level. And it's problematic because in this context, the national peace and local peace are quite interconnected, and the lack of national reconciliation undermines local peace. So I tried to schematize this in three mechanisms. So if you look at the first mechanism, even if the defeated party has lost the war, they often still have power at the local level, and they will use this power to try to win the peace. I put this statue of the Confederate movement because I think that the start of the United States is a bit paradigmatic in this respect. A losing party, but that continued to influence politics, tried to reestablish the segregation system, and even celebrated its heroes in this way. But you also have other mechanisms. So in many of these post-victory countries, the elites of the losing party are persecuted or imprisoned, and of course this causes sense of victimization in communities that see these leaders as their representatives. And the third thing that I want to draw attention to, that maybe it's less evident, is the fact that many of these countries have a neo-patrimonial political system. And there are these strong clientelist bonds between a political elite and local communities. So the politicians are often the patrons of the local communities. They provide economic resources, but they're also seen as a reference point for interpreting political events. And this creates a strong link between national peace and local peace. Okay, let me go now to Ivory Coast, which maybe is not the most famous country here in Brazil. So let me say a little bit about the context. Ivory Coast is a former French colony. After independence, it had a period of very quick economic growth under its first president, Houphouët-Boigny. But then in the 90s, a crisis that was at the same time political and economic started. So part of it's a bit too complicated to go into the details of the crisis, but some of the factors were the problem of both external and internal migration, tensions between communities originally from the north and communities from the southwest around the access to land, but also a crisis of the political system with a process of democratization that started after the death of Houphouët-Boigny, but didn't really progress. And the three major Ivorian politicians were a bit the protagonists of this crisis. And the two of these three politicians I'm referring to are the current president, Alassane Ouattara, and former president, Laurent Gbagbo. So what happened was that in 2002 there was a rebellion against Gbagbo that was president at the time, long negotiations, and then elections were held, and Gbagbo refused to recognize his defeat. And Ouattara managed to assume power with the support of the former rebels and the support of the international community. And now Gbagbo is at the International Criminal Court at The Hague, and he has been for too many years on trial and awaiting trial. So we hope that this story ends soon in whatever way it ends. But what I want to say is that it's still these figures are still very, the narrative of the conflict is still very much disputed. So Gbagbo is seen by his enemies as someone who tried to steal the election, created new violence, but for his supporters, he's a hero who fought against neo-colonialism and was unjustly persecuted, and now basically he's in prison for fighting for his country. So how does the local turn comes into this context? Well, this rhetoric and practices of the local turn were introduced first by the United Nations operation in Ivory Coast. And this was not really, it was more a question of necessity than of effectiveness, because the UNOC mission was deployed with the mandate of supporting a peace process that wasn't working. So basically what they did, they could not do what they were supposed to do. Let's do some small-scale projects that can give a positive contribution to peace. Then the Civil Affairs Division became very important within the mission and started all these projects of community-level reconciliation and quick impact projects. What happens after 2011 when peace is reestablished, but on the ground that one of the parties is imposing peace to the other, so not on the basis of an elite pact? What happens is that the new Ivorian government appropriates this rhetoric. In particular, they liked the expression social cohesion that was introduced by the United Nations, and they even created a national program of social cohesion. And when you talk with the people who manage this program, and I put on the slide a quote, they tell you, they emphasize so much the importance for local communities to reconcile with each other and dialogue with each other, and they say it's them who have to take the initiative, not the political elites. But in practice, if you go and talk with these communities, a lot of problems come out. And so I tried to make examples of how the three different mechanisms that I previously mentioned hamper this local level reconciliation. So first you have many cases where local politicians affiliated with Gbagbo's party or pro-Gbagbo organizations are trying to hamper these projects of community-level reconciliation. So I talked with several people working for international and national NGOs, and they say we go to a village and these people call the politician, and the politician says, no, don't engage in this project, don't listen to these people, and they follow their politician basically. And then another problem that came out of the time is the people from this pro-Gbagbo, these ethnic communities that are considered sympathizers of the Gbagbo side, they're talking all the time about the fact that Gbagbo is in jail and other politicians of the Gbagbo camp are in jail. And they use very emotionally charged expressions like, our brothers and sisters are in jail, our relatives are in jail, how can we reconcile? And so there is this sense of ethnic identification and this emotional investment that also prevents peace. And there is the problem that I was mentioned that now clientelist political networks are controlled by northern politicians, who are excluding this person who are presumed to be on the other side from, for instance, government jobs. Okay, 1 minute, but I arrived to my conclusions. So what I want to say is that local peace building seems a good idea, but in practice it is hampered when there is no national level reconciliation. And if you look at cases like Ivory Coast, this rhetoric of the local town, instead of being an emancipatory sort of form of peace building, has become a way to depoliticize peace building and divert attention from important national level issues, in particular related to transitional justice and democratization. And if you talk with the local, they will often say that it's Gbagbo and Alassane, so the two big politicians that have to sit together and make peace first in order for the people to make peace. And so, yeah, I just want to caution a little bit against this discourse of the local town, especially in a context where we see UN peacekeeping missions abandoning liberal peace building, assuming these mandates of strengthening state authority. And it can be a way to actually push away this problem of democratization and the legitimacy of the political system and reinforce authoritarian regimes. I stop here.
Thank you. Thank you. Isso aqui é o quê? Thank you. Okay. Okay, so we're moving to Aureo now. Thank you so much, Giulia. So Aureo is a professor of international relations at the Institute of Economics and International Relations, Federal University of Uberlândia, here in Brazil. He holds a PhD in political science from the University of São Paulo. From 2014 to 2015, he was a visiting scholar at the Humanitarian Conflict Response Institute, University of Manchester, UK. And his main areas of interest are theories of international relations, mainly post-structuralist and post-colonial perspective, Ernesto Laclau's discourse theory, and international security, with particular attention to peace-building debates. 15 minutes, Aureo. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Espera 2 segundos. Aí.
Hello. First, I would like to congratulate the Institute of International Relations for organizing such outstanding seminar It's an honor for me to be here and to take part in this event with people I truly admire. So I would like to thank Professor Sky Kenko and Maíra Siman for inviting me for this occasion. And what I'm going to present is, well, I can say it's like the prelude of my theoretical investigation about the local turn in this building. So I think we share similar thoughts here. A first draft of this presentation was, I need to...
Sorry. Don't worry.
Thank you. A first draft of this idea was presented last year at the Decolonizing IR seminar here at PUC as well. Now what I plan to show you is the second step I have taken into this investigation. So I think I might frustrate some of you. I've been frustrating you since Monday because I'm not going to talk about a particular case study. My concern here is largely related to understanding the local in peace building context and how to do empirical investigations about it. Before I start, I would like to present you this empirical puzzle. When I was studying state building in Afghanistan, I came across with this problem. You have former President Karzai, despite being a Pashtun, the biggest ethnic group in Afghanistan, and with strong connections with power networks in the country, lost several roll call votes in the parliament, mainly those related to budgetary issues. The opposition, despite lots of differences among them, and despite an electoral system that incentivizes fragmentation, was capable of some cohesion and defeat the president. This is the first puzzle. The second one, I have Althusser's front cover as well. I found out after reading Severine Althusser's book. Severine Althusser's well-known analysis of the Congo. It starts with a summary presentation of questions that usually researchers on this particular subject face. A particular question draw my attention was the following: why did some ethnic Tutsis ally with President Kabila to fight other ethnic Tutsis? This was a puzzle that drew my attention after reading the book. So I'm going to do the following now. First, I will identify what I consider are the main traits of the so-called local turn in peace building, and try to show you what are their limitations, the limitations of all these authors, in my opinion, share. Secondly, I will draw from Ernesto Laclau and present to you a new reading of the local. And finally, I want to explore some repercussions of these theoretical discussions for peace and conflict studies. And let's go then. Why the local? Why the local turn was a needed endeavor? According to analysts, one of the many failures of the liberal peace building project was not giving due attention to local people in order to build sustainable peace. There's a lot of authors, but I'll highlight two of them. Richmond, for instance, he argues that the liberal peace building project rests upon cultural assumptions that legitimate governance over the social-economic well-being of inhabitants, thus denying the very local agencies it seeks to enable. On the other hand, Althusser argues that international intervention fails because peace builders neglect local causes of violence due to what she calls an international peace-building culture, which, among other things, fetishizes elections. Significant work has been done so far, taking the local into consideration. One of the greatest achievements, at least for me, was the idea of hybrid peace. These authors, they claim that in peace-building activities, what takes place is a sort of interaction between international and local actors, which result in a negotiated or even subverted form of peace. However, this is important, the power relations that circulate through these encounters and the political structures that emerge from it may not necessarily lead to a more positive and a more emancipatory form of peace. Although we have all these achievements, the local term faces a good deal of criticism. Giulia said to us some of this criticism, and I would like to emphasize some others. A core problem is the construction of the local and the international as binary opposites, and this, in my opinion, creates many secondary problems, such as a weak conceptualization of primary actors, a romanticized interpretation of hybrid peace governance structures, and a blindness to the role of local elites. I think it's possible to say that this hybrid peace approach also neglects the importance of economic and social structures by locating the barriers to peace at the ideational level, if you want. In light of this debate, what I have done so far, I've returned to Homi Bhabha's idea of hybridity, which, at least in my understanding, is the main theoretical anchorage of this debate. This return allowed me to present my first idea. One of the main problems the local term suffers from is its conceptual treatment of hybridity. Hybridity in peace building is mostly viewed as a non-take category, while, in my reading of Bhabha at least, it is an ontological category. In order to clarify this ontological discussion, let me give you an example. One might investigate the construction of national identity in a variety of contexts. If the research takes for granted the notion of national identity, which are given in the practice themselves, as well in second order accounts, then the research operates at the ontological level. On the other hand, if the research inquires into the underlying presuppositions that determine what is to count as an identity or role, how these phenomena are to be studied, and that they exist at all, then the research incorporates an ontological dimension. The more an inquiry is directed at the categorical and extensive preconditions of a practice, the more the ontological dimension is foregrounded. So, hybridity, the way the peace-building literature treats it, it's a non-take category. For Bhabha, it's an ontological category. The other thing this return to Bhabha allow me to do is a second finding that I was able to find out during my readings. Bhabha, in an interview, he says that the concept of the people is not given as an essential class-determined, unitary, homogeneous part of the society prior to a politics. The people, as Bhabha understands it, are there as a process of political articulation and political negotiation across a whole range of contradictory social sites. The people, according to Bhabha, always exist as a multiple form of identification waiting to be created and constructed. This allows me to say that another problem of the local term is that it takes the local as a datum, as a fixed starting point, not something that might be also under continuous construction, even during international interventions. The task, therefore, for me, is to equip myself and others with appropriate tools, not to find the local, as Richmond would say. In the sense, Richmond is kind of a humanist, but to understand the political construction of the local. That is my cue to bring Ernesto Laclau to the discussion. If I had to summarize Laclau's contribution to political theory and political analysis, I would bet on three concepts: antagonism, hegemony, and populism. Blending Gramscian insights with Derridian deconstruction and Lacanian psychoanalysis, Laclau defends that there is no transcendental logic that foregrounds history. Division and conflict are ineradicable elements of societies, and the field of the social could be regarded as a trench war where in which different political projects strive to articulate a great number of social signifiers. However, it is important to understand that the construction of these social identities depends on antagonistic relations that at the same time are the condition of possibility and impossibility for them. In other words, what I'm saying is that antagonism is a relation between inimical forces, so negativity becomes an internal component of such a relationship. The presence of the enemy prevents me from constituting my own identity. Another example, I don't know if some people would agree with me, but I could say that patriarchy prevents the affirmation of feminist ideas, for instance, but is also the condition of possibility for the affirmation of a feminist political identity, something like this. However, in a society, always in conflict, is a society without any room for politics. We would have enemy, we would have only civil war, and life would be impossible. Here is why hegemony matters. If we accept that conflict is ineradicable and that there is no ultimate ground for society, all attempt to build an order is a contingent one. An hegemonic relation is therefore a situation when one particular difference, without ceasing to be a particular difference, assume the representation of an incommensurable totality. This hegemonic totalization requires this is hegemonic situation is what allows the end of conflicts for at least for a minute, for a couple of years, and that's it. Finally, we reach populism. It's one of Laclau's main ideas. For Laclau, the people is not a sociological category and not even a deviant form of politics. The concept of people and populism Laclau proposes should be seen as a strictly formal one, for all its defining features are exclusively related to a specific mode of articulation, independent of the actual contents being articulated. This is why Laclau asserts that populism is an ontological, not an ontic category. Populism for Laclau is a type of logics, one way of constituting the unit of the people. Let me give an example. This is the front cover on populism from Ernesto Laclau at 2005 book. And I want to show you how populist logic works. The minimal unit of analysis is what Laclau calls a social demand. For instance, through this example, think of a large mass of agrarian migrants who settle in the shanty towns of a city, an industrial city. Problems of housing might emerge, and the group affected by these problems, they make a request, a demand to the system, to the government. If the government tries to resolve this demand, then this request is solved, there's no problem at all. But if this problem, this demand is not solved, then you can have, and there's the first problem, this D1 is the first demand for housing. The second demand is another group of people asking for education, and D3 is another kind of demand, for instance, demands for health. And the antagonist relations allows these demands to be equivalential. They are equivalential in relation vis-a-vis the government, the state. So what I'm trying to say to you is that the dimensions for populism, for the creation of the people, we have this antagonistic relation vis-a-vis the state. We have a series of demands that in relation to the government they are equivalent. They are not the same, they are equivalent, but in relation to the government. And they crystallize around a specific demand. A specific demand starts to crystallize all other demands and becomes the focus of the group, of the conflict. Let me just wrap it up. So in the case of Afghanistan, the antagonist relations against Karzai allow the opposition to crystallize around a specific demand. In the case of the Congo, analyzed by Althusser, the antagonistic relations between the Tutsis and the government, but as Althusser rightly says, she points, there was this specific demand regarding land that allowed this crystallization and explain this, and it's the answer for that puzzle I presented to you. This is something that I think we could try to bring into peace and conflict studies analysis. And this final graph here, I don't know if you can see, but it's a broad framework to try to understand peace building and conflicts. You have the first situation where we have sedimented threats. I took this from a book from Dirk Neighbors. You have the situation of civil war or a country. Then you have a dislocation, for instance, the arrival of international troops or even a civil war. This creates antagonistic relations which may or may not lead to institutionalization, to the moment of hegemony. So, in order to wrap it up my presentation, I want to show you 5 inferences from my analysis. The first one, if my ideas make any sense, I think I need to polish them and start to doing some empirical research in order to prove, in order to understand, to show if they have any analytical gain vis-a-vis other approaches. Second inference, at least for me, by understanding the local as a political logic similar to the way Laclau conceives the people, I think we have a chance to escape the international local binary. And the local, therefore, could be seen as a political construction, and this construction is enabled vis-a-vis the presence of international actors. 3. The concepts I've laid down during my presentation, they have not only ontological and epistemological assumptions, but I think they provide some methodological guidelines for research. Difference, for instance, from the hybridity approach, which, at least in my understanding, covers only ontological and epistemological dimensions. They lack methodological guidelines. 4. The role of the analyst. In the hybridity approach, the analyst, in a way, attests the hybridization processes, which is quite a difficult thing if you are departing from Baba's strict understanding of hybridity. In this hegemony approach I'm proposing, the analyst has to investigate points of antagonism and the political construction of the local, which might not be easy, but it's easier than to find out where we have hybridization of the process or not. Finally, regarding peace, the possibility of an emancipatory peace should be viewed only in ontic terms. In ontological terms, peace is a radical and contingent political construction able to hegemonize the social field, dislocating other possibilities. Peace is thus hegemony. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you so much. So I'll pass to Renata. Most of you students know Renata. So Renata holds a PhD in International Relations from PUC-Rio, and was a visiting PhD student at the Open University. She holds an MA in International Relations from Sciences Po Paris, and a BA in journalism from the University of São Paulo. She has worked for the international desk in newspapers such as Folha de São Paulo, Globo, and has been assistant editor of International Political Sociology. the journal. Currently, she teaches at the Institute of International Relations here, PUC, where she's an adjunct coordinator for the undergrad. She did field work in Bosnia, Herzegovina. Her research interests are the following: conflict and post-conflict situations, borders and boundaries, the Balkans, international relations theories, and everyday approach in IR. You have a PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes.
Acho que eu preciso daquele.
Outra aqui. Mas o seu microfone tá?
Alô?
Espera 2 segundinhos.
Alô?
Não?
Alô?
Dentro da Giulia.
Alô?
This one.
Hello.
Yes.
So, first of all, thank you, Maíra and Kai, especially for inviting me to be in this panel. It's such an honor to be part of this seminar, and also to the audience and the students who could come, despite everything. So, I also like to give a big thanks to Giulia and Aureo, because they make my work so much easier from a presentation, because even though we didn't talk before this, specifically of what we're going to talk here, in the end, actually it's a very big dialogue. We are all problematizing in some ways local approaches, even though we're doing this through different perspectives, or we're bringing different thoughts, right? So I'm going to try to explain mine as my case study, if you can call it that. So I will present a little bit about the case of Bosnia. And when I was studying this particular thing that I'm presenting here, I was trying to see how the enactment of boundaries between the local and the international were taking place in Bosnia-Herzegovina. So when I was trying to do that, I came to a few conclusions that I'll try to explain here, that these enactment of boundaries, they are not happening in the ways we actually think they are, and not exactly where we think, we usually expect that they are happening. So, as I said, I'm trying to intervene in this local term debate, which I will not explain, luckily, because I think we had like very good presentations as well. So I was just, depart from that, those explanations to say that, yes, I cannot see the local neither as a spoiler or as a savior. I mean, I was trying to get away from both of these images, and especially from this romanticization that is very present in a lot of literature regarding what the local means. I mean, what's local peace? I mean, we need to bring ordinary people in, okay. And so when I was in Bosnia, I was trying to do this work to try to see the enactment of boundaries, not only between like what is called international and local, but also between ethno-national groups. So for the ethno-national groups, it was quite easy because the Dayton Peace Agreement made it very easy to call, like, to understand space in terms of ethnic space. So it was very easy to go to this so-called boundaries that have been institutionalized by the Dayton Peace Agreement, and try to see how in everyday life people are negotiating these boundaries. But when it came to research the local international boundaries, it was much more easy. It was much more difficult. I was there for about 6 months in total, and I was struggling until the end to try to understand where I should look at to actually grasp where the international local were actually happening. And in the end, I was concluding that I cannot see very clearly the difference between what is international and what is local. So one of my first guesses, and this was really like taking a chance, because of what Bosnia represented during the 90s, and the whole amount of international intervention that happened there, and when the state was being building, what the state was supposed to mean, what peace supposed to mean, and how those very things were related to some conceptions of economic liberalism, market capitalism, and also liberal peace. So democracy and all that. So I was thinking that a very good place to look at those dynamics was to study this shopping mall that to do this? Okay. That this shopping mall that is it was actually built. I mean, it actually is there, right? I mean, it's there in the kind of the center of the city. So in the beginning, I was having these very simple ideas of going to the shopping mall and thinking that maybe this shopping mall is only visited by international workers because they were the ones who had the money, I was told. And okay, how they would represent in this very division between international and local, but in the reality it was much more complex than that. And so I started researching a little bit the history of this shopping mall. And okay, so this here in this picture, it's what was called Sarajka, that was built in 1975 in a period where Yugoslavia was trying to modernize itself, and so Sarajevo was the last capital to receive such a shopping mall. All the other capitals inside of Yugoslavia had already a shopping mall, and so it was a little bit of idea of the entry of Yugoslavia in a little bit different kind of economy. I won't go very deep on that here. But of course, when I was looking at Sarajka, the history of Sarajka, I also found out that it was very much a place of dispute. I mean, it was one project among others. I mean, when it was built, it had many other things were destroyed, places of affect to many people. There were lots of campaigns of the people who didn't want a shopping mall in the city, or people who wanted other kinds of destinations for this space. Then, when it came to the 90s war, Sarajka, as great part, like at least 1/3 of the other buildings in Sarajevo, was destructed, like aimed at, like not by chance, but was voluntarily destructed. And it stayed like this for a long time until 2002, with many other state-owned companies and buildings. It went through a process of privatization. So in 2002, it was bought by a group of Islamic banks, basically based on Arabic Peninsula. So that's basically what we have now. It's BBI Center. That is what you're seeing in this slide. So what we have now is this completely different shopping mall that is owned in part by these Arabic Peninsula banks, and also one part is owned by Bosnia Bank International, which is based in Sarajevo. So it's a maybe hybrid of maybe a local international, but that's I want to try to problematize this local international thing here. So, so by looking at this shopping mall, I was also at the same time paying attention to this big square, which is one of the biggest. We would call maybe the biggest public area of public meeting area in Sarajevo, even though if you look closer, you see that actually it's private. So it's owned by the BBI Bank, the BBI Center. So basically, even though it holds many of the public events in the city and many initiatives, like for example, let's get lots of, there are big refugee question now in this area, and so that's where people gather supplies to give to the refugees. Everything is organized in this square, even like LGBT parades and stuff like that. But who set the rules of this square in the end of the day? It's BBI Center. So it also helps to rethink the idea of public and private in this particular setting. So what I was trying to do actually is then to get further from the idea of this data disagreement, this very hierarchized idea of how Bosnia was built, the international intervention very heavily shaping what Bosnia is. Instead, by looking at these particular places, I was taking a more like transversal look in order to understand then how, so first of all, how there is no local Bosnia waiting for an intervention. So what we come to call Bosnia today is already a place where the international is produced and reaffirmed. So the international is being produced in this very production of what Bosnia is today. So you see, in this final slide, you see that there are many other shopping malls that were reproduced after the BBI Bank. There was a little bit of sketch, just to see how, where the shopping malls are now, and in other cities as well. And they have been, according to some of my interviewers, they are seen as a little bit a place where people can be anonymous and they can go to the shopping mall and not being recognized as being of such or such ethnic group, but also as like an international worker. For example, I interviewed many people from NATO, and it's interesting to see their relationship with the city and how in the every time, of course Bosnia is a particular case, we can talk about that after in the questions, but how every time they are out of work and outside of out of military base, they like to dress as civilians and being outside in this a square or shopping mall and just deal and live life as almost like a local, as some people told me. The good thing about Bosnia is that they can actually live like a local people. So that's where I start problematizing what exactly the local is. Is the local this bounded place, like Aureo was saying, or is the local already being produced outside of the very boundaries that we came to think that the local is? Okay, so basically this is my ideas. I think I'm getting out of time, and okay, and then I had a lot of other things to say, but basically I think I'll stop here, and I can answer some things and questions.
Thank you. Excellent. So let's try now with this technology here and try to call Teresa. Okay, I think she's ready. Should I put my image too? Yes.
Hello?
Hi, Teresa.
Sim.
Tudo bem? Olá.
Tudo.
Um prazer te conhecer por aqui, finalmente. Teresa, eu vou ler aqui a sua bio rapidinho e a gente já passa então. Tá tudo certo para você? Você consegue me escutar?
Consigo, sim, tudo bem.
Tudo bem.
Acho que tá tudo ok, né, Lina?
Tá tudo bem, então vamos lá. So Teresa Almeida Cravo is a researcher at the Center for Social Studies at the Humanities, Migration and Peace Studies Research Group and an assistant professor in international relations at the Faculty of Economics of the University of Coimbra. She's currently co-coordinator of the PhD program Democracy into 21st Century and coordinator of the master's degree in international relations, peace, security and development studies, both at the University of Coimbra. She holds a PhD from the University of Cambridge, Department of Politics and International Studies, and her thesis developed a critique of development aid discourses of success and failure in post-conflict states in Africa, focused on Mozambique and Guinea-Bissau. She graduated in international relations from the Faculty of Economics of the University of Coimbra. She completed a diploma on human rights and democratization law at the faculty of the same university and was later awarded a Master of Arts in Peace Studies from Radford University in the UK. So, muito obrigada. Thank you so much, Teresa. And thank you, of course, for joining us through Skype. And I hope we can have you next time here for our next event. So you have 50 minutes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Maíra, for the invitation and for hosting me, even though it's through Skype. And most definitely, I would love to go to Brazil for this type of seminar. So keep me in. So I was asked to talk about peace building, and I decided to do a comparative study, or just some notes on comparing Mozambique and Guinea-Bissau for the purpose of the seminar. So basically, up until 2013, since the 90s, Mozambique's peace-building trajectory was hailed by the international community as one of the continent's few successful stories, while Guinea-Bissau remained inextricably linked to the label of failure. And these two countries seemed for a long time to represent the epitome of what was ultimately wrong and right with Africa. And so there was a lot of praise and a lot of blame, and a lot of optimism and a lot of pessimism, some tolerance in terms of deviations from prescribed models, and pure abandonment on the other side. So there were these contrasting attitudes that characterized international communities regarding the two states for most of the past 2 decades. But when you read on both countries' peace processes and paths towards development, there is a need to paint a more nuanced picture. And it also points to serious problems on the way the international community intervened in both countries. And so since this is the angle of the seminar, I'm going to look at how the international community intervened in both Mozambique and Guinea-Bissau, and then try to draw some conclusions about them. So I'll start first with Mozambique, and then I'll turn to Guinea-Bissau. So Mozambique is basically an Eastern African country with around 29 million people. It's at least recently resourced in terms of wealth of resources, considered quite important, quite relevant. It was colonized by the Portuguese and achieved independence in 1975, and shortly after the independence, it was involved in a long and protracted civil war. And Mozambique has been hailed as a peace-building success story, basically right after the signing of the peace agreement, which took place in 1992. So this was a 16-year war, which was considered one of the most devastating wars in Africa, and at some point it claimed close to 1 million lives. And it was fought between Frelimo, the National Liberation Movement, which had fought the anti-colonial war against the Portuguese, and Renamo, which was the opposition movement, which was first instigated by external actors, Rhodesia and South Africa, but then it very quickly gained popular support inside the country. So the peace was between Frelimo and Renamo, and it was closely monitored by international actors. And there was an interesting combination here that was quite favourable to peace in Mozambique at the time. First, it was the end of the Cold War, and so the international community was claiming all these wars in the periphery as wars of the international community, that is, wars which demanded its interest and engagement. And particularly the UN seemed quite eager to play the role of leading the international community down the path of conflict resolution and peace building in the periphery. And so its so so-called Agenda for Peace, which was precisely created in 1992, was setting the scene for the UN and later other organizations to be involved in peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace building. And so Mozambique shows up at the time as an opportunity to showcase those new intentions of the international community, dwell on these concepts of peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace building, because I know you've discussed them yesterday, to try and see how this played out in terms of Mozambique. So if we go back to 1992 and Mozambique's peace agreement, there was this opportunity for the international community to be involved, okay, and to show off its new agenda. And then there was also another quite important thing happening at the same time, which was the Angolan debacle also in 92. So Angola was kind of a shadow hanging over the international community, which made it become quite deeply vested in making Mozambique a success story, because it had been basically deeply embarrassed by what had happened in Angola. So Angola, after a peace agreement and with the peacekeeping mission in the field, had returned to full-scale war in the aftermath of elections. And so the UN badly needed a success story, because it was trying to prove its capacity to live up to the expectations of being able to bring peace to the periphery. So the reason why I'm mentioning this, so the aspirations of the international community and also a clear case of failure right before Mozambique, is because there's a very particular point about Mozambique's peace building, which is the level of engagement and investment of the international community in this peace process at the time. This started with the deployment of a UN peacekeeping mission in 1992. It was mandated to monitor the peace agreement, to engage in DDR, so demobilization, disarmament, and reintegration, and also to hold elections. Elections were held in 1994, which Frelimo won, which is the party in power ever since. There hasn't been rotation in power. And the last peacekeepers left in 1992. So I feel that peace building would have started with the international presence in the field and was going to be essentially passed on to the recipient country, but aided by a very significant amount of international donors. So at the time, most authors, media outlets, donors all agreed that Mozambique's case was a success. And if we go back to the literature in terms of kind of standards of success, Mozambique seems to be kind of a check case. So it held on to peace after the peacekeepers left, which is clearly one of the standards for success. It held on to peace 5 years later, when we know that in terms of statistics of the UN, about 50% of the cases go back to war, so check again. 10 years later, it was still being praised, and it was actually in the midst of a huge economic growth spurt, and so it was even more appreciated at the time. 15 years later, there was still no return to conflict. It wasn't until 20 years later, after the peace agreement, so around 2012, 2013, that the international community began to truly worry renewed armed clashes between renowned bushholders and the Mozambican army. So Mozambique basically begged, one is, why did peace break down in 2013? And the other one is, why did peace break down only in 2013? And I'm going to start with the second question. So why was there no return to the armed conflict immediately after 1992? And bear in mind that I'm keeping my angle in terms of the international community's actions and intervention side, right? Not necessarily the internal actors right now. Because there are obviously several factors at play, but focusing on our attention on the role of the international community, guaranteeing a successful peacekeeping story, which was the one that was directly connected to the UN peacekeeping mission, inevitably led to the assumption that we needed to guarantee a successful peace-building story. So what I mean by this, in other words, is that it was necessary for the donor community to remain vested in Mozambique. So it wasn't just about the peacekeeping mission, it was about making sure that everything that went on beyond the peacekeepers left was still, in a way, supporting the peace process, with a long-term perspective. And so very early on, in 1995, there were already several programs that were funded to continue the work that had started by the peacekeeping mission in terms of the country's rehabilitation, integration of former combatants, the help in terms of reestablishing a healthy economy, etc. And so what we know from the peacekeeping mission in Mozambique is that before they left, they were already laying the ground for these other actions to succeed. And they were actually making commitment in terms of financial pledges to make sure that these programs were funded after the peacekeepers left. There were also several episodes where Mozambique's kind of derailing from the prescribed neoliberal model, which could have meant, and there was, the threat from the World Bank, which would have been disastrous for Mozambique at the time. And this was, for instance, caused by great inflation rates. And that was, Mozambique at this point was clearly kind of like derailing from what it should be, what the behavior of the economy should go. That was late, early 2000s, late 90s. And basically there were these threats about, so are we going to drop Mozambique in terms of the aid we're giving because it's not fulfilling the right model. And all these things were actually forgiven because there was a need to guarantee that Mozambique wasn't punished to the point of endangering its progress towards peace and development. This involved being okay with inflation rates, with debt pardoning, all of that was involved here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, wait. Yes, I'll just. Okay, now you have me. I'll just close my camera in order to have a better image from you. Because it's okay, but sometimes it just stops. Yes, I'll just. Okay. Excellent. It's perfect. You can continue.
Okay, I can turn off mine if you want as well.
Should.
No, it's fine.
No, I think it's fine. Let's try to keep your image. Otherwise, I'll tell you. Thank you.
Okay. So what I'm trying to say here is that there was a long-term perspective in terms of the international community's concern with Mozambique's progress towards peace and development, and this involved a lot of several funding of programs that were meant to develop this path towards peace and development, but also it involved basically pardoning some other aspects of not so good performance on the part of Mozambique that other case studies in other countries hadn't been able to. So the international community pretty much spared Mozambique from very harsh treatments when it came to it, and it compensated it with steady commitment, steady flows, and the number of donors was actually increasing and becoming quite stable. So to sum up, the international community didn't really kind of abandon Mozambique after the peacekeepers left. On the contrary, it remained quite present and quite committed. So why did peace break down, the second question, in 2013? Obviously, there were several factors here again, but there were plenty of problems that were already at the root of the civil war, in fact, and that were never really resolved. And the reason for that is also, if we want to connect it to the international community, is because they weren't really high on the international community's agendas. So one of them was political inclusion. So even though the international community paid lip service to the need for democratic transition, to integrate Renamo, to integrate other political formations into the governance of Mozambique, donors were pretty much comfortable with having Frelimo as the main interlocutor, and they were, in the end, comfortable with the increasing authoritarianism of Frelimo and its very exclusive way of governing. Complaints from not only Renamo's elite, but also the grassroots constituencies of Renamo were pretty much ignored throughout the years. And as long as the relationship with Frelimo remained important, donors kind of shied away from too much criticism, and when there was criticism, the criticism was pretty much without severe consequences. And so once these problems of the lack of inclusion of Renamo supporters and Renamo areas into the state apparatus, the lack of distribution of wealth, and especially when there was discovery of natural wealth and there was expectation that this would mean something to these areas and these populations, then at that point became quite undeniable that Frelimo's governance had deep flaws, and then the clashes began. Okay. So this is more or less my appraisal of what's happening in Mozambique since the international community kind of looked into it and became involved. What about Guinea-Bissau? So Guinea-Bissau is a small West African country of around 1.8 million people, so it's tiny compared to Mozambique. It was also colonized by Portugal, and after one of the most successful liberation wars in the world, it became independent in 1974. And there was a brief honeymoon period with the international community where there was a lot of interaction with the international community, but it pretty much went downhill from there up until today. One of the reasons is the grave instability. It's mainly instigated by military intervention in the country's politics and also politicians' instrumentalization of the armed forces. And this has been a source of continuous crisis for the country, but also a source of problematic relations with outside actors. And then adding to this history of instability, there was also a brief but brutal war between 1998 and 1999, which basically reinforced this image of the country as a failed state, a problematic recipient, and
you stopped when you were saying that Guinea-Bissau was constructed as a failed state repeatedly, with no stability, not a good recipient.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so let me just go back very briefly. So in Guinea-Bissau, we don't have a traditional peacekeeping operation like we had in Mozambique, but according to the UN, peacebuilding in Guinea-Bissau started in 1999 following the 11-month civil war. And then there was a peace agreement that was signed and a government of unity, of national unity that was created. And in 1999, and so shortly after, the UN established a UN Peacebuilding Support Office in Guinea-Bissau. And then in June 1999, and then in January 2010, it was replaced by the UN Integrated Peacebuilding Office in Guinea-Bissau. And this was already when Guinea-Bissau was was one of the case studies within the Peacebuilding Commission in the UN. So basically the problem, the most serious problem in terms of the relationship between Guinea-Bissau and donors is the fact that Guinea-Bissau has been plagued by instability. So since the war, when there was supposedly a turning of the page at the beginning of this peace-building engagement with Guinea-Bissau, there have been 10 prime ministers, 3 elected presidents, none of whom actually completed their mandates, 4 assassinated. There was a coup, a very the relationship with the international community, with Guinea-Bissau being basically suspended from the African Union. There was a withdrawal of the security sector reform mission from the EU. There was a suspension of aid disbursements. And then there was, again, elections in 2014, which seemed to briefly restore the international community's confidence in Guinea-Bissau. And there was renewed international recognition, new aid pledges, but then in August 2015, there is a new cycle of instability that started that hasn't really finished. I mean, there have been 5 governments formed since 2015, and there's basically the crisis has spilled over, and there's not that much of the state apparatus that's actually functioning. So the UN mission in terms of peacekeeping is to basically bring all the interested parties, be it political parties and civil society, to work together to address the root causes of instability. That's the main problem. And just briefly, because I need to finish, obviously, but I feel like there's 2 big problems with the international community's actions in terms of peace building in Guinea-Bissau. The first one is a tendency for quick fixes that never works. And then the second is an investment in purely technical rather than political peace-building strategies. So in terms of quick fixes, there is very clearly some faltering commitment, a half-hearted effort all the time. So there's a certain presumption on the part of the international community that things will go wrong. And so when it does, there's a readiness to just leave or suspend or abandon. And so within this intervention in terms of peace building, there's a vicious circle that both Guinea-Bissau and international actors seem to be stuck in. And then this other point of the technicality of it. So the peace building model for Guinea-Bissau seems to be technical transplantation. So basically the transplantation of a liberal framework into the state apparatus in Guinea-Bissau. And this was particularly clear with the security sector reform and the rule of law reforms in the country. And in these cases, basically, the pattern of intervention is one in which the intervener basically applies beyond its borders, its experience from within. So this leads to blueprint of Western liberal prescriptions which third world countries need to follow. And despite a lot of talk in terms of comprehensiveness and broad understanding of peace, reforms in practice have time and again focused on a certain formalism over substance. So there's a prescription of shallow legislative reforms, and they basically just hope that this will get implemented somehow, but without an investment in terms of long-term commitment. And so everything that relates to peace building, which involves structural transformation, even though it is in the rhetoric present, it actually remains out of reach. So to conclude, there seems to be a common problem, even though these two cases are actually quite contrasting in terms of the international community's attitude towards them when it comes to peace building. They do have something that is clearly in common. When we analyze these two case studies, the standardized model of the liberal peace encounters many difficulties in basically achieving its goals and in finding legitimacy within the local communities. So peace building, which is in theory a concept that was supposed to be a broader understanding of peace and its social basis, gave way to a very narrow so-called liberal peace understanding. And this liberal rationality is actually imposed whether it's in Mozambique or Guinea-Bissau. And so the problems in both countries that we can basically attribute to the international community's performance and intervention has to do with the model itself and not just basically the actor in particular. So basically what it has meant is that this kind of Western liberal framework in the end undermines the aims of curbing instability and fostering development in both countries, even if their external images aren't actually the same.
Thank you so much.